welcome to another episode of How to Build Your Own PC. Today I'll be talking about the motherboard. First of all, this is going to be one of my longer videos because there are a lot of terms I have to define and explain. But I'm not going to get into super detail on how the motherboard communicates data between each interface because you wouldn't have time to watch that long a video and it could get very dry and boring after a while. What I am going to do is explain the job the motherboard does and what slots and connectors are for and what goes where when you're building your PC, so you have a basic understanding of what's going on for now, and so you of what the interfaces are being used for. That being said, first of all, what is a motherboard? The motherboard is the main circuit board which all of the components are connected. The choice of motherboard or MOBO, as enthusiasts call them, determine all the other parts you're going to use for your build. What brand CPU are you going to use? How much memory can you install? What kind of expansion card you're going to place in, etc., etc., etc. In this next slide, I'm going to show you is a diagram of the actual motherboard I'm going to use. I actually took a picture of this and diagrammed it myself, because I couldn't find a good, decent enough one online to show you guys, so I just made my own. First of all, the colors of the slots in this board are not a color coding system of any kind. Every board that I've seen has different color schemes. It's not a good way to tell what the interfaces are or what they could be. As you see, there's lots of different labels I have here. I'm only going to talk about the major slots and connectors so you guys have an idea what and where you guys are plugging in your components, and just for now a general understanding of what they do. I'll give more specific information on how these items work when I do my separate videos on them. The CPU socket here is for AM2/AM2 Plus socket AMD CPUs, which is what I had a quad core, I think it was a Phenom 1 for this board, but I'll cover that more in the other video. The memory slots for RAM in here are DIMM DDR2, which stands for Dual Inline Memory Module and Double Data Rate 2. And this board I think supports, because it's an older board, it only supports up to 8 gigabytes of memory, which I had 4 2 gig slots, for 2 gig modules to put in here. The 24-pin connector here is to power the entire board, while the 8-pin connector here is only for the power to the CPU directly. If we move the yellow slot between the memory and the power is for IDE drives, or Integrated Drive Electronics, also known as PADA drives, or Parallel Advanced Technology Attachment. I told you guys there'd be a lot of acronyms in here. The ribbon connector that will plug into this will go, well, it's for the older standard of hard disk drives. 2 drives can be hooked up to the ribbon. One is a master and one is a slave. Nothing kinky intended, just that's how they are phrased. The cluster or plugins down here are for the newer standard of hard drives, which is for SATA, or Serial Advanced Technology. Those are used for, like I said, hard disk drives, solid state drives, as well as optical drives. The main difference is these can be hooked up independently, where that's why they have multiple IDE connectors, so you could have 3 or 4 drives. You could have 6 drives here with the plugs. You just can't see the 4 because they're pointing off the other way. The PCI slots, or peripheral component interconnect slots, these are the older expansion slot where graphics cards were used, as well as network adapters, or to create additional ports for USB or FireWire. Also, these could hold extra, like, Ethernet cards if you wanted to have more than one plug-in, or like the Ethernet port failed, you could place another one without getting a whole new board. Anyways, the PCI Express up here, the longer slots, and the smaller one here, use much higher speed, and I will have a comparison chart for PCI Express versus PCI in the video about graphics cards. These slots, along with video cards, can be used for wireless adapters and solid-state drives, because solid state drives can actually use PCIe instead of SATA, which actually it's much faster doing it that way, but I've never had one that could do that. Newer motherboards only have these type of PCI slots. These are gone because this is an older board. It still has some of the older standards, but yeah, these are completely wiped off now. Some of the things I should mention, a couple of not really components, but pieces of the board I didn't mention, but I should, or didn't label anyway, were the north bridge and the south bridge. Now, the north bridge communicates information between the CPU and the PCI Express slot, so between your graphics card and your CPU, which is, for this board, its north bridge is actually this integrated video chipset, which is basically an onboard video adapter, so it's not needed for you to actually have a graphics card. You can plug a monitor directly into the motherboard and get video output. But if you're buying a PC for gaming, you probably were going to buy an extra card anyway. But if you're not, you don't necessarily have to. But not all boards have this chipset. You have to double check that before you decide on that. Now, the south bridge communicates data between the CPU, SATA drives, Ethernet ports, USB ports, and sound ports. And I can't exactly pinpoint where it is on this board. I want to say it's about here under one of these. So both of those are used to communicate back and forth between all the slots to the CPU. The last thing I want to mention on this board is the SLI, because it's mentioned here, and it's mentioned on a couple of the other, I think on the RAM it's mentioned, and a couple other things. So I thought I'd go over that really quick. Because, like I said, there are a few different things that mention it. SLI, or Scalable Link Interface, allows for multiple GPUs or graphics cards to be linked together to get more optimal performance of multiple cards than a single card on its own. However, if you have an AMD card, they call it Crossfire, but this technology is fairly similar. So, hopefully, I didn't go through this too fast, and there's still all these terms are still settling in your head. But for selecting a motherboard, if you're picking all the parts out yourself and not buying a pre-made kit, you want to try to future-proof yourself as much as possible. Pick all the new standards, AM3 or 3 Plus if you're getting a AMD CPU, or for Intel, the new Haswell E processors use LGA 2011 version 3, DDR4 RAM, PCI 3.0 Express. If you can get all that in one board, you're pretty much golden. And I saw an MSI board for about $180, which I think is a pretty moderate price for a higher end desktop board like that. Some of the boards I saw go up to $500, so $180 is not bad at all. But it's better for you to get the higher end motherboard now and get, an i5 processor instead of an i7, or an older, like 600 or 700 level Nvidia graphics card instead of a 900, because you can always upgrade to that stuff later if you have a newer board, because it'll last you longer. If you do the opposite, and I'm going to get the best processor and the best video card, but get an older motherboard to save on the price, either the parts aren't going to fit in the board, you could run the risk of damaging your parts, or you're not using the parts to their maximum potential because you didn't get the newer standard on the board. Again, like I said in the beginning of the video, all of this determines your template for what parts you can put later in the build by selecting which motherboard we want. So all this aside, we're going to the practical part of the tutorial where I'm going to install the motherboard and my coolant master gates from the last video. Hello there. Here's the practice tutorial of installing a motherboard into the chassis. As if you can see down here, we have I already left the spacers in. I figured you'd be able to screw those in on your own. They're down here. There's I believe 8 or 9 of them. There's 9 of them down here to
space up the motherboard here. That's the same one I had in my diagram as you saw. That keep the motherboard raised off the backplating in order to stop that from arcing, electricity from arcing from the board to the case, because you don't want that. That'll ruin your board very fast, and then it could easily fry all of your components and you're out a lot of money. So what I'm going to do here is place this, take this. I already put my, I don't know if you can see it, you can see the slots for the peripherals back here. I already placed that in, and I moved out all the cords out of the side that are meant to plug in from the case to the board. I'm going to place this down here for you. See if we can get it nice and secure. Okay. And I don't know if you can tell, but very easily, let me see if I can zoom in and help you out a bit. There are, I believe, 7 screw holes that will hold the board down to those risers into the case. So make sure it's very secure, because you don't want this coming loose and falling apart as you're on your computer. You don't want the cases falling apart and breaking mid-use. So there's no point in not having it be very secure. So I'm just going to go through and screw all of these in. As you see, this is where the spots on the side there, these will come in handy, because as I'm putting the cords in, I'll be able to organize them and make the case a lot cleaner. If you need to move something later, you won't have a rat's nest, but you really don't want that in your computer, not knowing where everything is plugged in a tangled mess. It just looks bad. And I don't know if you saw, but I had put on the fan socket, as well as the back of the board. There's a spacer to help again with the metal spacers. There's a other side of this plastic piece to keep the board away from the bare metal of the case, again, to stop electricity from frying your board and the rest of your machine. There we go. And I'm just using the screws that came with it. I don't know if they're all original, but as you see, the nice thing about this case is it's got plenty of screws. If you look upwards more, it has a bunch of spare screws in case you run out, which is fantastic. But again, not all cases have that, but this one does, and I enjoy it a lot. And I guess one of the other components I forgot to mention is the little round battery here, which kind of looks like the battery you'd put in your watch, which is the CMOS battery. And that controls a lot of the information for your BIOS, your date and time, that sort of thing. And if you're having a problem with a lot of date and time syncing errors, one of the things you can do is you can pop that out and it'll reset all that for you. So, and also they do have some jumpers occasionally down here to clear it without popping it out, just pushing the button. So I think I only got two screws left here. Alright, now we got all the screws in place, so it's safely mounted to the chassis. Now we're going to start to plug in these cables that are with the case. I'm going to see if you can read them correctly. We got HD audio, 1394 for firewire for the top of the case. USB. There's a SATA cable here. That's to the external SATA on the top of the case. And out of the front of the case, we have all these little plugins. See if you can actually read them. The power, positive, and negative for the LED. That's for the power switch. The lettering's kind of rubbed off there. The power for the reset switch for the side of the case. And the little light for the hard disk drive. When it's reading and writing, it'll cause that to light up. And those are all going to go in this little cluster down here, below the two buttons. Start plugging this stuff in. Your 1394 port on this board. Let me make sure this is untangled first before I do that. Anyway, like I said, your 1394 is that green box below your PCI slots, which again are these are the older ones for graphics cards. The newer ones are the longer slots, which these don't even exist on the newer boards, like I said in the informational tutorial. So yeah, this is a board I got in 2008. So there's some older components here, like these parts for IDE drives and even floppy disk drives, which are, no longer used at all. I don't recall. I doubt some people even watching this know what a floppy drive is, let alone that this board has a slot for one still. I'll give you a hint. It's the symbol when you save on Microsoft Word. They show a picture of one. Still, after all these years. Here's our HD audio again, and that's going to be all the way to the left here. Let's see if I can point it out the other way for you. Move the camera. It's going to be way over here. See if I can zoom in and move this over. There we go. I can see that a little bit better. Another thing you want to make sure while you're doing this is that either you're wearing an anti-static strip, which I am not because I actually don't own one at the moment, which it's a alligator clip to a bracelet that goes around your arm. So if you have any electrostatic discharge, it will carry electricity and ground it out so you don't discharge it into any of the electrical components here, because these are very sensitive to that. One spark could fry your board, RAM, etc. And if you can avoid that if all possible, that would be to your advantage. But if you don't have one, like what I'm doing here, I'm just laying my hand on the side to ground myself out to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's a good alternative if you don't have one already. But if you want, you should go out and buy one. I don't think they're too expensive. Maybe between $5 and $10. Make sure. And also, I'm making sure I don't bend my pins as I'm plugging this stuff in here. You don't want that. Let me turn these around. Get the cables back in place. Here's our SATA cable, like I said, for our eSATA. And you can plug that into any of these SATA ports. It doesn't matter which one. I'm just doing it on this one because it'll be a little bit easier. And we have our USB, which is actually 3 clusters for plugins for USB here. You can use any one of them. It doesn't matter which one, because they're all designed to have the same pins to match this. But if you had let's say you use this old slot for a USB expansion card, you'd have a pin set to plug into one of those to give you extra ports in case you needed them. But anymore, with this board, there's 4 2.0s on the back of this and 2 on the top, and I think 6, that's still plenty, and newer boards have even more, so the need to have like 20 USB ports is really unnecessary. But for these older machines that only had 4 or 6, you might need a couple more. So on here. Alright, so all we got left is our plugins for our LEDs, for our power switch and reset switch. Also, we have a plug-in here for the fan on the front of the machine. Should be one, yeah, there's one right here, which is the perfect distance away. So it's supply power, for a fan to keep it cool. I don't believe the fan on the front of this is LED. But yeah, that's another thing. Maybe I should make a video about that later on, about the type of fans you should get, because most of these cases, like I mentioned before, don't come with either come with 1 or 2 fans, but they don't fill all the slots, because you, like up here at the top of the case, you could use liquid cooling instead. That's why they give you the extra space in case you wanted to do that. But a lot of times, all the time, it's more expensive to do that, and it's a lot more laborious, because you actually have to set up your system, cut your own tubes if you don't do the pre-made ones. And it is better to make your own, to make it cut the exact length you need. But in that case, you have to let your system, run for a day or 2 to make sure no water leaks, because I don't need to be a computer technician to tell you that water and electricity don't mix very well. But it's a lot more efficient for cooling. So let's see if we can get our power set up here for our switches. And in most cases, your motherboard will come with a nice little poster diagram of where to plug in all these little pins. Also, they gave me, with this one, I got rid of them, but I should have kept them little riser modules to stick on top of these to make it a lot easier to read what pins go where, but I memorized what they are. But yeah, so we have all of our plugins currently, well, except for our fan on this side. Get that in there real quick. There, now we've got them all in there. So for right now, we got our, nope, meant to go back. There we go. We got all our cables situated right now. It's looking fairly good. I might have to mess around with the stuff on the bottom to make it look a little cleaner when we put the power supply in. But yeah, everything's plugged in as it should be from the chassis to the board, and next I'll do the power supply, because that would be the hardest part. Once you got these cables plugged in and the power to the board from the power supply, that's the hardest part. After that, everything's really easy. You just gotta stick your components in these nice little pre-designated slots, and then you should be good to go. To get your stuff to power on. So yeah, that'll be all of it for this week. Hopefully you guys will subscribe and like my videos. But I'll see you next week where I install the power supply. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.